Okay, so once again, good afternoon. So for this module, what we will be tackling about are the different factors affecting second language acquisition. I'm sure that you already have an idea of of these factors since we've been through discussing. We have been discussing several theories pertaining to language acquisition. And with those things that we mentioned from those theoretical perspectives, I have already indicated some of those factors that would affect one's language acquisition. And for this module, what we'll be doing is that we'll be consolidating all of those, and then we will be relating some of those factors that we'll be mentioning here on those theories that we mentioned. Okay, so specifically in Krashen's point of view when it comes to second language acquisition, since whenever we're talking of second language acquisition, we're always going back to Krashen's five hypotheses, kasi plural hypothesis. Okay, so but before we move on to that, let's again, para hindi nyo makalimutan, ano ba yung konsepto ng second language acquisition. So, this is the process by which people develop proficiency in second or foreign language. According to Ellis, SLA is a complex process involving many interrelated factors. It is the product of many factors pertaining to the learner on the one hand and the learning situation on the other hand. So that is why in this lecture, we'll be focusing on what are these factors that Alice is pertaining to as far as language acquisition is concerned. And to conclude, second language acquisition is a subconscious process, just like what we keep on mentioning, that we are not actually aware that we are already absorbing those things about that particular language. Growing up, we're not very much aware that we are already acquiring the language that we are using right now, especially, let's say, when we're talking of our first language, which is Filipino, we are not actually aware that we are already acquiring it. Okay, that we're not actually aware that we are already absorbing those things in relation to the language that we're using. So it can be compared with second language learning. However, when we are talking of language learning, as we defined it, it has a conscious effort on our end to really learn it, to really know it. So we are aware that we are knowing it. Let's say, for instance, your teacher's teaching you how to speak English. That's a second, that is language learning. Or your parents are telling you that these are the things that you should do whenever you're speaking to someone. These are the things that you have to follow when you're constructing the sentences, or other people surrounding you. So that is language learning. So again, language learning is described as how formal language education helps us learn language through more conscious process. Conscious process because we are aware that we are studying it, and that's the difference between acquisition and learning as far as language is concerned. Okay. So from the book of Brown, which is one of our references, he mentioned of the different factors affecting the second language acquisition or the language acquisition per se. So these are age, motivation, attitude, intelligence, aptitude, learning styles, personality, and other essential factors. So we will be discussing them one by one. And just like what I mentioned to you a while ago, that we'll be trying to relate it to some of those theories that we discussed specifically from Krashen's point of view. So when we talk of age, it is pertaining to you being adult or being young. And based on Krashen's language learning or learning acquisition hypothesis, the first hypothesis that he mentioned, that although child and adult has this similar way of acquiring language, but there is a difference in terms of acquisition. And their age is actually affecting the way they acquire language. And if you're going to argue on why is it that there are still adults that can still speak different language, still speak a different language, wherein that language is not the language which they used growing up, because hindi na acquisition na pinag-usapan natin doon. Learning ang pinag-uusapan natin. It's because pinag-aralan niya, kaya siya natuto magsalita ng other languages, let's say foreign languages. But as far as language acquisition is concerned, sabi dito, second language acquisition is influenced by the age of the learner. Children who already have solid literacy skills in their own language seem to be in the best position to acquire a new language efficiently. Motivated, all the learners can be very successful too, but usually struggle to achieve native speaker equivalent pronunciation and intonation. If we're talking of language acquisition here, now, if you'll be asking, if you'll be arguing, sir, why is it that others can still speak a different language? Because we're not talking of acquisition here. We're talking of, if that happens now, it means that we are pertaining to language learning. Pinag-aralan nila yon. Pero yung nandiyan lang sila, naglalakad, and then they're exposed to different people. Then they're just hearing people talking these things using this particular language, and then later on acquiring it. The nativity o pagiging native speaker is not possible unless otherwise talagang pinagtuunan niya ng pansin yun at pinag-aralan niya talaga yun para maging ganun siya ka-fluent. So again, we're talking of acquisition, not learning. So yun yung difference. Kaya if you will be asking, sir, bakit may mga adult na very fluent? They sound like as if they are a native speaker because they study it. Language learning yon. Pero kapag ang pinag-usapan natin language acquisition, no, it's not. It's very difficult. Which is unlike with, parang ang bata kasi parang blank canvas yan, di ba? Na habang lumalaki sila, they are very much focused on everything that they are perceiving, everything that is perceived by their senses. Di ba yung pinag-aralan natin kay PJ, yung development of a child. And when we're talking of language development as far as PJ is concerned, sabi natin na yung mga bata during the sensory motor skills, they are very much focused. So everything that is perceived by their senses, ina-absorb nila yon. Okay? And then as supported by Vygotsky, na kung sino nakakasalumuhan nila at napapakinggan nila everyday as a child, na-absorb nila yon. Now, kapag ikay tumanda na, yung acquisition mo kasi nagkakaroon ka ng restriction, nafi-filter mo na eh. Kapag adult ka na, you kind of filter everything that you would like to absorb, which is unlike if you're just a child. So, hindi mo napi-filter. Hindi mo napi-filter yung na-absorb mo. Pero kapag tumanda ka na, may maturity na yung pag-iisip mo, napi-filter mo. Hence, there's a tendency na that if there's a difficulty in language acquisition on part of the adult, unless pag-aralan niyo yon at pagtuunan niya ng pansin yon, then language learning intervenes. So yun naman yon. So yun yung explanation kung bakit. Why is it that there are adults who are able to study a different language? Because again, language learning na pinag-uusapan natin. I hope that is clear. So moving on. Oops. Okay. So, from this study by biolinguist Eric Lennerberg, he presents that in his fundamental work of biological foundations of language, so he also posited the critical period hypothesis. So, what is that critical period hypothesis? So, it consists roughly in the idea that a certain age is appropriate for learning a language so that it's impossible to achieve full competence before or after it. Okay, so, ano yung pag language learning na pinag-uusapan dito as far as yung age na factor ang pinag-uusapan natin dito. Di ba sinasabi natin na on a particular age, merong pinag-aaralan ng mga bata. Let's say kapag yan ay mga 4 or 5 years old, mga basic literacy skills, mga phonemes sa pinag-aaralan. Pag nag-grade 1, ini-introduce na yung mga words. Pag nag-grade 3 and grade 3, na-introduce na yung mga short sentences. Grade 5, grade 6, ayan na, very complex na yung mga sentences. So yung sinasabi natin na if we're talking of language learning, there is an appropriate age for them to learn because it's very difficult for a child to learn a language. Let's say if you would like them to learn English language right away, considering that the first language that they're using at home is Tagalog or Filipino, and you will be introducing to them right away English using a very complex structure, that it will be difficult on part of the child kapag language learning ang pinag-usapan natin. Unless otherwise, that the first language that the child is exposed to is English, then more likely it's possible for the child at a very young age makapag matuto na siya ng mga complex sentences. So, kasi nga, yun yung expose siya. Di ba nga, when we talk of input hypothesis, yung pinag-aralan natin kay Courage, input hypothesis, that certain input, just like media can also be an input to a child. Okay? Yung bata, nanonood na lang lagi ng Peppa Pig. Ayan, nagiging British accent na. Yung bata, Cocomelon ng Cocomelon. Ayan, tuto na mag-English. Kakapunod ng mga English na palabas sa YouTube. Wala nagtuturo sa kanya, pero natuto siya. Kasi sa acquisition, yung bata, kahit bata yan, mas focus. Yun yung na-absorb niya. Okay? Pero dito nga, sinabi ni Lenberg na kapag language learning naman ang pinag-uusapan natin, may appropriate age para sa mga bata na para matutuhan nila yung second language. Kung English man yan, utay-utay. May proseso. Okay? Then the second one is motivation. So there are two types of motivation when we're talking of acquisition, okay, and learning also. Okay, so a learner studies a language because he's interested in the people and culture of the target language, or in order to communicate with people of another culture who speak it. So we call the integrative motivation. If we're talking of language learning here, halimbawa, we do have the so-called English or ESL, or English as Second Language curriculum, which is offered among those non-English students who come from non-English speaking countries, just like Japan, China, Korea, and I forgot something. Korea. Okay, so those are some examples of non-English speaking countries. I'm not so sure if I had already introduced to you CACRU's Circle of World Englishes. CACRU's, K-A, let me type that so that you will be particular of CACRU's. Okay, CACRU's Circle of World Englishes. Okay. Okay, so ano yung CACRU's Circle of World Englishes? So it is 3 circles. So we have the inner circle, and then the outer circle, and then we have the I forgot the last the last circle, but there are 3 overlapping circles. So what is that circle or CACRU's referring to? So those who are at the middle, or what we call the inner circle, these are the country wherein English is considered as their first language. It is like America and the United Kingdom. However, tayo sa Philippines, along with Indonesia and India, and even Canada, second language nilang tinuturing ang English. They belong to the outer circle. So when talk of outer circle, so these are the countries wherein they are using English for specific purposes, and they are using English since it is embedded already on their culture, wherein it is not really, or it's not actually the language that they are using every day. I don't know why Canada belongs to the outer circle, considering that they are speaking, maybe because they were colonized by the British Empire. I'm not so sure of that. I'm not very much particular of the history, but Canada also belongs to the outer circle along with the Philippines, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so they belong to the outer circle. So it means that English is our second language. Now, what it has something to do with integrative motivation. We, being at the outer circle, we link inner circle and those circle outside the outer circle, which are the non-English speaking countries, such as Japan, Japan, Korea, and Japan, Korea, uh, Japan, Korea, China. Yan. We're parang nasa gitna, we're linking them because these people coming from the outside of the outer circle, they would like to learn English basically because they want to study in America, they want to work in America, and in order for them to to work and study in America, they have to pass the what we call the English proficiency test that is offered by those countries who are at the inner circle. It is very advantageous on part of the Philippines having recognized to be one of the good English speakers, sabi nila, because there's no need for us to do such process because we already have that global recognition that we can speak English and we can converse and we can communicate with others and we can even imitate American accent. That's our advantage. That's why whenever we're going to America and we would like to study in America or in United Kingdom or country coming from the inner circle, there's no need for us to pass those tests, which is like with those countries coming from our recognized non-English speaking countries. Now, the Philippines being at the outer circle and being at the middle, we try to connect these two in a way that we are offering the so-called English as second language instruction. Nagtuturo tayo ng English dun sa mga non-English speaking country and we serve as a bridge to them. And because of the recognition of the Filipinos being a good imitator of American accent, it seems like we already have this high demand for ESL teachers. And it's very much apparent. And it's very much apparent to my students, to my former students. Most of your ates and kuyas from BSc English who graduated at URSM at the Polo campus, they pursued ESL as an alternative when they weren't able to look for a job to teach doon sa school mismo. What they did was they applied for as an ESL teacher. There are plenty of them. Okay, so I'm actually doing a research about ESL. That's why I already made an initial survey about these students who are into ESL teaching. So, yung mga nasa outside of the outer circle, they would want to study English for them to communicate with people of another culture. And that culture that we're pertaining to is the culture of, let's say, the countries coming from the inner circle, which are, let's say, UK, America, and Australia. Okay? So, ang tawag natin is integrative motivation. The reason that they would like to learn English is because of that integrative motivation. Okay? So, another thing which is in relation to what I mentioned pa rin is yung instrumental motivation. Okay? A learner's goals for learning the second language are functional and useful. For example, they need to the language to get a better job, to pass tests, to enable him to read foreign newspapers, etc. So, yung example ko kanina is very much apparent pagdating naman dito sa instrumental motivation. Okay? So, kapag ang motivation mo, why you would like to study English per se is only just to learn the culture of the country, integrative yon. Pero kapag halimbawa, ang motivation mo naman is katulad yung mga nauna kong nabanggit kanina, yung to get a job, to pass tests, ang tawag natin instrumental motivation. So these are the two examples of motivation why some or why many, especially the non-English speaking countries, would like to learn the second language. Siguro sa atin sa Philippines, as we can already communicate with others. Some point it could be instrumental on our end, but we don't need to go to undergo a process of passing an ESL examination in order for us to really uh, to land a job in America. Although I think there are some Filipinos who are working abroad that um, instrumental motivation na lang yung ginagawa nila, even though there's no need for them to pass an examination, but since they really would like to improve their speaking skill, they would like to improve their English speaking skill, then nag-aaral pa rin, nag-enroll pa rin talaga sila sa mga ESL na yan. By the way, I'm sure you heard of ESL and EFL. Magkaiba kasi yun. Kapag halimbawa ay nasa isa kang, let's say, Japanese, tapos nag-aral ka sa isang English-speaking country. Let's say, lumipad ka sa Pilipinas at doon ka nag-aral ng English sa Pilipinas. ESL yun. Kapag halimbawa ay nasa Japan ka at nag-aral ka ng English sa Japan mismo, which is a non-English speaking country, EFL yon, English as Foreign Language. So yun yung technical difference between the ESL and then the EFL sa setting, pati sa approach. Okay? So, ayan. So, ayan yung pag learning ang pinag-usapan. I'm just integrating language learning here, although our focus is on language acquisition. But just to give an idea also on language learning, factors affecting language learning, motivation also affects one's goal to learn another language, or if it's English second language, as a English as second language or ESL, or English as foreign language or EFL. Okay, so again, these are the differences between integrative motivation and instrumental motivation. Motivation is triggered by the needs, the wants of studying another language. And then, if you're talking now, let's now go back to language acquisition. Attitude is also a factor because there are some who would like to embrace the language that they're using. There are some who's quite passive. So Alice said, a world-renowned thought leader in the field of second language acquisition defines attitude as the sets of beliefs about factors as a target language culture, their own culture, in case of classroom learning, of their teachers, integrate ko na naman yung language learning, and the learning tasks they are given. So if you're quite passive of embracing the language that you are using, even though the first language that is being used inside your house, let's say Filipino, but you're quite passive of that, therefore you will be acquiring the language. Since you are more immersed, let's say the children are more immersed with watching YouTube, watching videos that are using English as medium on that particular video material. And then whenever the parents are talking to them, mas prefer nila to speak in English even though the parents are using Filipino as their first language. Yung sinasabi natin passive response. Yung attitude ng bata towards language acquisition is passive on absorbing the language that is being used inside the house. And I think you could relate to that there are some instances na meron ng ganun. I even observed some of those children that I know that I hate Filipino. It's really difficult for me to speak Filipino, but the parents are speaking Filipino in the house. But since the child is always exposed to the technology, watching a lot of English videos. So, and plus yung the medium of instruction that is being used inside the school is English. So, factor yon. So, nababago yung attitude ng bata towards studying the first language, wherein sa Philippines, dapat matuto pa rin ng pagsasalita ng Filipino. I think that's the downside of that kind of habit, the attitude of the child towards learning the first language, wherein he or she has to learn that first language for the very first place, and nagkakaroon ng alteration that results to positive response of the child to learn the first language, which is kung sa Philippines sa pinag-usapan natin, Filipino. Next, Jack C. Richards said that language attitudes are the attitude which speakers of different language have toward others' languages or to their own language. So, kapag merong bias yung bata on studying second language at passive siya doon sa first language, ang kanyang acquisition is leaning towards the second language acquisition, not on the first language. So expression of positive or negative feelings toward a language may reflect impression of linguistic difficulty or simplicity, ease or difficulty of learning, degrees of importance, social status. In terms of difficulty of learning, let's say for instance that the child is passive on let's say for instance the first language of the child, considering that the child comes from the Philippines, is Filipino. So the child has this difficulty on understanding lesson in Filipino subject. Okay? So nahihirapan siya sa pag-aaral ng Filipino. Consider na yun yung first language niya, which is unlike to many of us. It's easy for us to grasp the lessons on Philippine, although grammatically speaking or syntactically speaking, we really have this difficulty on absorbing the rules of grammar in Filipino. Syntactically speaking or grammatically speaking or rhetorically speaking, mahirap sa atin. Pero yung paggamit natin nito in a daily conversation, kasi yung first language natin, madali. Pero ngayon, ilagay natin yung sitwasyon natin, studying second language, introducing to us English. If you have this difficulty on understanding language, and most of the text that you are reading in the class are written in English, so it becomes difficult on our part to really comprehend. It is for that reason, ang baba talaga ng comprehension level daw ng mga Pilipino dun sa recent study na linabas noong isang international organization that measures the comprehension level of people around the globe, which includes the Philippines, wherein napakababa ng ranking natin. And considering that, we are plummeted by huge numbers of learners coming from non-English speaking countries who are going or visiting the Philippines to study English. You see the irony of that. Maraming pumupunta sa ating mga galing sa ibang bansa para mag-aral ng English. Pero ang comprehension level natin mababa at sila pa yung mas mataas. 'Di ba, nakakaloka? And ang justification naman nila dyan, kasi tayo mga Pilipino, functional literate tayo when it comes to using English. Functional literate. Ibig sabihin, bagaman hindi natin alam, hindi natin kabisado yung syntax ng English, kung kailan ba gagamitin yung is at or, yung paggamit ng s tsaka es, napaka-functional literate natin. Functional in a sense na kahit baloktot ang ating English, nakakapag-converse pa rin tayo at nauunawaan natin sila. Kahit pa sabihin natin na barok tayo, nauunawaan natin sila. That's our advantage towards them. Maybe because these people coming from non-English speaking countries, they might be able to master the syntax of English. Pero when it comes to utilizing it practically speaking, doon naman sila medyo alangan sa atin. Kasi tayong mga Pilipino, bagaman baloktot yung ating grammar, kaya pa rin natin makapag-converse dahil kaya pa rin natin umunawa naman ng English kahit pa paano. Hindi naman natin ma-express yung sarili natin kapag may kausap tayong mga Inglesero. Nauunawaan naman natin sila. Yun naman yung kagandahan sa atin. Sila, Kumbaga yung ibang taga-ibang bansa, kabisado nga nila yung formula sa pagsulat ng pangungusap, sa pagsulat ng sentence. Pero sa practical application, doon naman sila medyo dehado. Pero pagdating naman doon sa mga test na yan, doon naman dehado ang mga Pilipino. Okay? So, yun yung sinasabi natin difficult of learning. Pero kapag ang language mo, let's say English, you get used to using English every day, that's your first language, then the ease of learning becomes easy. Okay? And then, next, Gardner and Lambert have investigated a number of different attitudes, which were classified by Esther into 3 types. So what is our attitude towards the community and people who speak language or the second language? Again, pag sinabing L2, that is second language. So attitude towards learning in language concern and attitude towards languages and language learning in general. So when it comes to attitudes towards the community and people who speak the second language, what is our attitude towards that? Are we very much open as a community in general? Are we very much open to learn the second language? If you'll be going to ask majority of the Filipinos, would they like to learn English? Would they like to learn English, or would they like to use English as a part of conversation? Okay, or for specific purposes. Okay, so attitude towards learning and language concerned. Do we really want to learn it? Do we really like the language per se? Attitude towards languages and learning in general. Okay. Then intelligence. We cannot say that all of us has this linguistic ability. Others might be knowledgeable when it comes to numbers, analyzing numbers, which I admit I am poor on that. However, others who are really gifted with linguistic ability, maybe it runs on their genes. Therefore, it becomes easier for them to absorb it. There are some people who are really polyglots. Polyglots means they can easily learn English. It really makes that person on my part more intelligent. Ang galing, paano niya natutunan tong alam to? I'm very much impressed with those people who really speak different languages, considering that is not your first language. Okay, so Cambridge Dictionary defines intelligence as the ability to learn, understand, and make judgments or have opinions that are based on reasons. So I'm sure that you're all particular with Howard Earl Gardner, because sabi nga ni Howard Earl Gardner, walang taong bobo. Okay? Meron lang talaga tayong iba't ibang talino. Kasi 'di ba? Gardner, we have this period wherein we consider, even in the Philippines alone, we have this period in the Philippines or even other parts of the globe, wherein if you can speak English, you are intelligent. We have that kind of thinking in the Philippines before. If you can speak English well, you are intelligent. But if you're going to ask the person to compute a mathematical problem, although that person can really speak English well, that person would have this difficulty on computing those numbers. Would that make a person still intelligent, or would that make person not intelligent? Or what if that person can really speak English well, but that person cannot dance well or cannot sing well? What do you call to the other ones? Not intelligent. May binary na agad eh. So Howard Gardner mentioned that it is not always someone who is really good at something and who is not good of other thing should not be tagged as bobo. Okay? So, balikan natin to. I'm sure that in your professional education subjects, you have already encountered the different intelligences, multiple intelligences. We have linguistic intelligence, sensitivity to spoken and written language, the capacity to use the language to accomplish certain goals, wherein this linguistic ability should be the main intelligence that most of English majors must possess. Linguistic ability. Kasi more of languages tayo eh. Okay? And logical, mathematical ability to detect patterns, reason, deductively, and psychologically. Dito ako mahina. Dito ako mahina sa logical at mathematical ability. Pakudain mo na lang ako ng pakuday, pasalitain mo na lang ako pasalitain, pasulatin mo na lang ako ng pasulatin ng mga kung ano-ano dyan. Pasagutin mo na lang ako ng mga grammar problems. Huwag mo lang ako papasagutin ng mga mathematical questions na kapag may kopyahan ako, kayang-kaya ko yan. Kasi nga, may nasusundan ko. Pero kapag tanggalin mo yung kopyahan, yan, nawiwindang na ako. Gugulo na mundo ko. And then we have this someone who's really good ability to use, to recognize and use the patterns of wide space in more confined areas. Sila yung spatial, okay? Mga spaces, ang gagaling naman ngayon pagdating sa mga pagtingin sa mga areas. Magaling parang titingnan pa lang nila, hindi sila naliligaw. Madali nila makabisado yung area. Kaya galing na ako rito alam ko dito yan. Then musical, of course, yung mga magagaling kumanta. Bodily kinesthetic, yung magagaling sumayaw, mag-perform. And then interpersonal capacity to understand intentions, motivation, desires of other people. Yung magaling makihalubilo sa iba't ibang uri ng tao. Social skills, yung mga katulad ng mga politiko, yan, interpersonal yan. Okay, pakikihalubilo, interpersonal skill yan. Interpersonal skill, dito naman ako magaling din, interpersonal skill, yung ability to understand oneself. Sila yung mga marunong umunawa, marunong tingnan yung kanilang sarili. Am I doing the right thing already? Kumbaga, they themselves are able to evaluate themselves. And then they have this sense of self-identity. Yung parang, at least, sila yung mga hindi kino-question yung abilidad. Although kino-question, pero nagagawa na lang unawain kung bakit sila ganun. Okay? If they're going to look in front of the mirror, they could sense, what's wrong with me? They can evaluate themselves. They can evaluate their emotions. They can manage their stress, and they can even manage their emotion. If you are lack of interpersonal skill, then that might lead you somehow na maging emotional ka, very sensitive of others. Ayan. Oftentimes, yung mga weak ang interpersonal, sila yung, let's say, nag-leads to depression, yung mga mental illnesses, sila yon. And then, naturalistic, yung mga mahilig sa mga halaman, sa environment, sa hayop, yan sila yan. So, yan yung different intelligences according kay Gardner. So, sabi niya, learning language alone requires intelligence. Others who are really good at when it comes to learning different languages, that just like Jose Rizal na isang polyglot, it's because they're gifted. They have that linguistic ability for them to easily absorb the lessons or things that are pertaining to learning that specific language. Another thing is that if they're really gifted with language, it becomes easy for them to acquire it. So, i-expose mo siya dyan sa iba't ibang uri ng tao kapag language acquisition ang pinag-uusapan natin. I-expose mo siya sa iba't ibang uri ng tao na tututunan niya na. And I think there is this guy, the child from Cambodia ata. Nag-trending tong batang to eh. Ang galing niya magsalita ng Chinese, nagtatay, aside from the language nila, nag-English. So, paano yun natutunan yun? Ang yung batang yun, yung Cambodia na may kumuhang organization dito at pinag-aral siya sa ibang bansa because of that linguistic ability ng bata. Natutunan niya lang yun sa pakikihalubilo niya sa iba't ibang uri ng mga turista. Kasi nagbebenta siya ng mga souvenirs. So, kapag may naririnig siyang languages, na binabanggit, wala naman siyang formal training eh. Basta naririnig niya lang, lagi niya lang naririnig yun sa mga tourists na nakakasalamuhan niya. Na-absorb niya, natuto siya mag-Chinese because of that. Natuto siyang magsalita ng Thai because of that. English because of that. Yung sinasabi natin na gifted yung batang yun, wherein yung kanyang linguistic ability is really way above the normal. Okay? So, on that aspect, maano yung intelligence ng bata when it comes to language acquisition. Okay? So, again, kapag learning pinag-uusapan natin, it requires really intelligence pa rin. Nagme-memorize ka talaga eh. Okay, nagme-memorize ka. And then we have the aptitude or aptitude. It's different from attitude. Ito naman yung mga special skills na meron kayo. Di ba when you were in high school, you have this aptitude test. And that aptitude test determine kung saan ka magaling. Let's say, magaling ka halimbawa sa pagpipainting, magaling ka sa arts. Okay, art-related dapat ang course mo. O magaling ka sa pagkanta, sa pagsayaw, o performing arts ang course mo. Magaling ka sa mga crafts, mga artworks, yung mga pagde-design, okay, design-related ang course mo. Meron kayong mga ganyang aptitude test when you were in high school. So this potential is often evaluated using formal aptitude tests, yung binababanggit ko sa inyo, which predict the degree of success the candidate will have with the new language. So aptitude tests vary, but many include evaluation ability to manage sounds, grammatical structures, infer rules, and memory. But the aptitude test that we're pertaining here is referring to language aptitude test. Okay? So, dito malalaman kung ano ba yung ability mo, level of your ability when it comes to understanding a certain language that you would like to study. So, let's say, for example, if you will be studying English as your second language, so may mga series of tests na, let's say, how will you manage the sounds, the phonemes, yung ginagawa natin sa speech and stage arts, yung mga sounds na yon, grammatical structures, kung yan naman ay may kinalaman sa syntax, infer rules, and even memory. And that aptitude test in language will determine if you will be able to really get used of that particular language. So let's say, yung ginagawang test para ikay makapag-aral, let's say, gusto mo mag-aral sa Amerika, isa sa mga test nila, dapat ay may pasa mo yung English test na yun. So, doon malalaman kung you are prepared or not prepared to study in their country. If they find out, based on the test, na mababang score mo, then it will be difficult for you to enter on that university. Because the first language that they will be the language that they will be using for instruction is of course English. So how come na ang baba ng score mo sa English language test, it will be difficult for you to really get use of the classroom setting nila which is using English as their medium of instruction. Richards explains that language aptitude is thought to be a combination of various abilities, such as the ability to identify sound pattern, recognize the different of grammatical factual words, just like what I mentioned sa inyo kanina pa. So students need aptitude, some specific ability which are responsible for learning language. And then we also have different learning styles can actually affect language learning per se. Although language acquisition pinag-usapan natin dito, pero again, I would like to emphasize that I'm also integrating language learning for this discussion because they are interrelated. So when we talk of learning style, it is also called cognitive style. It is the particular way in which a learner tries to learn something. And in L2 or in L3 is foreign language, L2 is second language, different learner may prefer different solution to learning problems. So may mga kanya-kanya kasi tayong style in order for us to learn specific language. So others can learn by just merely listening to others, to native speakers. Others could easily learn when it comes to language learning. Let's say, sinusulat ng paulit-ulit, then kinakabisado. Or others will have this different way of approach in order for him or her to learn that language. May kanya-kanya silang style. Okay? So, understanding learning style can be an essential tool to implement new learning procedures. So it could be different learners, different approach of learning should be done. If a particular approach is difficult on part of the child to learn that language, then use a different approach. Okay, so again, yung mga nabanggit kong approaches katulad nung memorization. Sabi nga natin dito sa previous discussion natin that repetition is actually a key. When we talk about repetition, yung paulit-ulit mo na lang siyang binabanggit, paulit-ulit mo lang siyang ginagamit, then more likely there is already a possibility of having a mastery towards learning that specific language. And together with an examination of learner's internal processes could shed a more complete diagnosis of the second language acquisition process. Okay, ito yung other approaches, sabi. Some learners may want explanations for grammatical rules. And then yung iba gumagamit ng grammar translation method. Yung English na, Tagalog pa yung ginagamit. Or kung ano yung first language na ginagamit ng bata. That's a learning style. Some may feel writing down words. Yung binanggit ko kanina na mas natututo sila kapag nanonote-taking. Ako ang learning style ko, regardless kung yan may pag-aaral ng language or not. My learning style is writing. Kasi in writing, as you write, dalawang input mo. As you listen to the teacher and as you write, dalawang input, listening and writing. Yan yung input mo. So, mas na-absorb mo yung sinasabi ng teacher habang nakikinig ka, sinusulat mo pa. At least on that note-taking, it becomes easier for you to comprehend on what the teacher is telling you. So, others may find they remember things better if they are associated with picture. Halimbawa, kapag kayo nakakita ng isang libro ng let's say gusto niyo mag-aral, let's say ng Nihongo or let's say Spanish or kahit na sa English, 'di ba? Pag nakikita niyo yung abacada, yung English, yung dilaw na libro, may mga images doon. Kaya halimbawa ay aso, sabing aso, may image ng aso. Tapos aso, dog. Kaya may image ng aso. So, yung sinasabi natin, may mga visual learners na gumagamit na ganung approach para mas madali nilang maintindihan o maunawaan. Minsan yung iba, halimbawa ay just imagine that these are the things that you do, and then lalapatan mo ng iba't ibang mga things that are associated to that images para mas madaling maunawaan. Okay, so Alice mentions that learning style or strategy accounts for how learners accumulate new second language rules and how they automate existing ones. Personality and its essential factors. Even personality, it has been described as a set of features that characterize an individual. It has been stated that this concept is difficult to define and measure because of its complicated nature. So tingnan natin kung bakit nasabi na complicated in nature itong personality na to. Self-esteem. Kapag halimbawa ay wala kang kumpiyansa sa sarili mo to learn that language, of course, it will affect your language learning or it even affect your language acquisition if you are lacking with self-confidence. Second, inhibition and risk-taking. So the most common problem encountered by the learner in the language acquisition process is learner inhibition. So speaking activities require a learner to have all eyes on him. Exposure to an audience can often give learners stage fright. Yan yung mga inhibition. So parang may halo na rin self-esteem. Pero it's more of, they may also be worried about making mistakes. being criticized or losing face in front of the rest of the class. And this results in their performance, whether either they make a lot of mistakes in spite of having very good knowledge in the area or totally keeping silent. So, yung pagiging doubtful niya sa sarili niya, that's inhibition. And fear of taking risks, of getting mistake. That's also a factor from someone who would like to acquire or to learn a specific language. Yung, di ba, maraming naka-experience ito. Bakit nahihiya mag-English? Because baka pagtawanan ng kaklase, because baka i-correct siya ng teacher niya at papahiya siya sa harap. Yan yung inhibition and risk-taking. Kaya when it comes to language acquisition, hindi niya na ina-absorb. So nagkakaroon agad ng barrier on part of the child or on part of the learner to acquire the language or to learn the language. Anxiety, medyo mataas na level na to ng personality concerns. So according to Zhang and Zhong, the main cause of anxiety stems from learners' unrealistic or erroneous beliefs about language learning. Sabi niya, hindi ko rin magagamit yan. Para saan pa yan? Diba? Well, some learners think they lack the aptitude or gift to learn a new language. Some believe that 2 years or less is sufficient for them to become proficient in another language without estimating the difficulty of the language learning task, and therefore, they could possibly experience conflict resulting in anxiety. Okay? So halimbawa, si McLinter and Gardner distinguish anxiety into trait anxiety. So let's say when people have some general predisposition to be anxious and state anxiety, which can be experienced in a particular situation, they also identify 3 components of foreign language or second language anxiety. Let's say communication apprehension, fear of negative social evaluation, and test anxiety. So kumbaga parang dinidibdib na nila yun eh. Kung halimbawa doon sa inhibition and risk-taking ay you're afraid to commit mistakes. Pero kapag dinigdig mo na yun na to the point that ini-stress mo na yung sarili mo on that, parang you're being pressured to do it but you don't want to do it, then that might result to anxiety. Hence leading to a difficulty for language acquisition and language learning. So kaya nga meron diyang tinatawag na fear of negative social evaluation. What will people think of me? Thinking of you. What will people think of me? Should I commit mistake? Kumbaga, lagi mo na yung iniisip. And because of that, you are apprehended to communicate with others. What if I commit mistake if I communicate with others? And I'm using this language and I commit mistakes. And then didibdibin mo na yung kapag nagkamali ka. Wherein for others, it might not be that it might not be serious, but if you're taken seriously in a way that will affect your mental health at some point, then that might result to being anxious of that. The more that you have the high, kaya nga diba sabi natin doon sa theory ni yung filter hypothesis, isa sa mga filter hypothesis ni Krashen, that the high anxiety, the lower the language acquisition. Diba we have that kind of leveling. The higher the motivation, the higher the self-esteem, the higher the possibility of language acquisition. The higher the anxiety, the lower the motivation, the lower the self-confidence, the lower the chance of language acquisition. Yun yung sinasabi natin na may kinalaman doon sa hypothesis that was posited by Krashen. And then empathy and extroversion are also some of the personality factors that has to be taken into account. So Hans Heinrich Stern headed the Modern Language Center at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, defined empathy as the willingness and capacity to identify with others. When we talk of empathy, you place yourself on the shoes of the others, meaning to say you would like to make the person feel that you know what the person is feeling. That's empathy. Okay, so you would like to place your shoes. You would like to make the person feel as if you are on the same situation for you to understand the situation of the person. In the case of language anxiety, This state of apprehension as study has negative effects on learner's acquisition of a language, just like what I mentioned to you a while ago. It may hinder the learner's progress in class, or may motivate him to study harder. So kapag na-alter yung anxiety into something that would really boost the confidence of the learner by empathy. Halimbawa, yung isang learner would experience anxiety in terms of language learning or language acquisition, and then someone would talk to the person through empathy, through empathizing the person and making the person realize na how important it is to learn the language or to acquire the language, then that could alter the hindrance of language anxiety, which will make the person to be more motivated to learn, to study harder. So yun, dyan pumapasok yung empathy and the extroversion. So kumbaga, it requires someone to make someone to at least feel at ease on learning the language and to alter the effect of language anxiety towards that person. Okay, yes, related sa affective filler hypothesis. Ayan. And yeah, the smart shaming would also affect smart shaming. Ayan, sa anxiety. Okay, the next. Oops. Ayan. In extroversion naman, research found that it has no significant effect in characterizing a good language learner. But nevertheless, sabi niya, it may be a factor in the development of general oral communication competence, which requires face-to-face interaction. Kapag ikaw extrovert, tapos kasama mo ang introvert, nahahawaan mo yan eh. Diba? Parang ganun yung kanyang impact eh. So, kapag lagi mo siyang kinakausap na gano'n, lagi mo siyang plus samahan mo pa ng pagiging empathy mo, then the more that there is a possibility for that person to really immerse the person and also to encourage the person to learn the language or to acquire the language, na hindi siya nagkakaroon ng hindrance towards that. And I think it's very much apparent to us being a country who is studying English as second language. Okay, so that's it for today. So those are the different factors that are affecting our language acquisition, and also of course with inclusion of language learning.